If there's one thing I've learned, it's that getting outside is always worth it, no matter the weather. Welcome to Humans Outside, where we're building a life around spending time in nature while learning from fascinating outdoor-minded guests. I'm Amy Bouchatz, a journalist originally from the beach in California, now working to love nature from my home in Alaska. Since September 2017, I've spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter what. Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go! It's getting dark here in Alaska. You might have heard that it's always light here part of the year and always dark the rest of the year. The sun either never sets or it never comes up. And while that is true very far north in the state, here in the Anchorage area, where the vast majority of the state's population lives, our shortest day sees sunrise at about 10:15 a.m. and sunset at about 3:45 p.m. And thanks to hints of daylight before and after that, you're looking at around 6 hours of usable light at the shortest day of the year, right before Christmas. Okay, so that's not a lot of daylight. If you work a regular schedule or go to school anything resembling 9 to 5, you're missing all of it while inside your office. I have ways of combating that, like making sure I take at least a short walk daily while it's still light outside. But even if you're doing a daily 20-minute habit, you still might not make it outside when it's light. And while things aren't that dramatic darkness-wise where other people live, shorter daylight impacts us all over the winter months. And so can that sinking feeling of darkness called seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, and related problems. How can we get through it, and what role does heading outside play? Quick caveat here. We're about to talk about some stuff like depression that should also be discussed with your doctor or mental health provider. Obviously, nothing we say here should replace that, and if you're feeling depressed, I really want to encourage you to seek help. We're all about getting help here. Which is why we're so lucky to have someone with us today who is one of the top experts in the country on SAD and circadian rhythms. Dr. Michael Terman is the president of the Center for Environmental Therapeutics, has a doctoral degree in physiological psychology from Brown University, and is a professor of clinical psychology in psychiatry at Columbia. He studies drug-free therapy for these problems, including things like light therapy. And it's a really incredible opportunity to have him here with us today. Here's our conversation. Dr. Terman, welcome to Humans Outside.
This sounds very interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so very much for your time. We always start these podcast episodes and our conversations with our guests, just sort of like imagining ourselves with our guests in their favorite outdoor space, wherever that might be. And so I'm hoping you can describe what your favorite outdoor space is, and maybe we can imagine ourselves with you there today.
Well, a little bit of background. I was born in Hell's Kitchen on the west side of Manhattan. Not your favorite place for being outdoors. So when I managed, and I'm still here in New York, when I managed to get outdoors, my favorite place is not that far away. It's at the eastern end of Long Island, Montauk Point, where I like to go camping on the beach.
That sounds very pretty. You know, I grew up in California, and while we had campsites near the beach, it was an entirely new concept for me that people actually camped on the beach after I left there, because it's just not something that this state lets you do. So no camping on the beach.
And this is a state campground.
Yeah.
What do you know?
There you go. Okay, so you've told us where you're from, but we usually start our episodes hearing how our guest became someone who likes to go outside. So, being from New York City, what's your story? How did you become someone who's interested in this?
Well, you crave it, right? You don't have it, so you crave it. And we always did this as kids. My parents would take us camping, and so it just is became part of me, and I look forward to it every year.
Mm. And what you're known for is understanding and leveraging environment to help us psychologically, which you call environmental therapeutics. So, can you tell us how you got into that?
Rather through the back door. I was working on my PhD studies at Brown and doing work with animals on their day-night cycles. This was in the early days of circadian rhythm research. And that involved turning the lights on and off on different schedules. Uh, um, and I was able to develop some powerful methods for moving the biological rhythm earlier or later, depending on the schedule. Then I heard that the National Institute of Mental Health had been doing the same thing, but with people who were getting depressed.
Mm.
They had a clinical application for what I was doing in the animal lab. So I bolted over to psychiatry, came back to New York, and that's how it all started.
And what did you find in that research?
Well, we're working with uh, people who become severely depressed uh, once a year in the winter months and look like completely different animals in the summer.
Mm.
Um, and that applies not to a majority of the population, although you see it, traces of it throughout the population. But here we're working with people who meet the uh, psychiatric criteria for a major depression, and they can predict when it's going to come in. And slightly different for each individual. It may start in mid-September or mid-October. By Thanksgiving time, you're going to have it if you're going to get it. And then just as spontaneously, it resolves itself in March and April. And by May, everyone is back to normal for
Mm.
a good summer. So that's the pattern we were dealing with. And the idea was, can we intervene as these really debilitating symptoms set in the fall? Can we uh, uh, proactively uh, prevent the episode from setting in? Or if it has already set it in, can we pull people out of that episode and make them feel like springtime come December and January? So that was the goal of the research. And we developed methods that managed to do that quite nicely and
Mm.
without antidepressant drugs. And that,
Mm.
I think, was the important insight, because the tradition of psychiatry over the last 30, 40 years is to give an antidepressant when somebody crashes like that. And we've been able to bypass that requirement and do with excellent results.
Mm. So you've described people who are clinically depressed, seriously depressed, but is it possible for these, this seasonal, I don't want these seasonal mood swings, I guess, to impact someone who's not deeply depressed, like to still feel that without being all the way over the edge of clinical depression?
There are there's the full range of gradations here.
Mm.
For research purposes, understandably, we concentrate on the most severe cases,
Sure.
but we get to know the people who dip significantly, but would would not be called patients with major depression. It turns out that the exact same treatment approach, either preventive or compensatory, applies regardless of how severe the symptoms get.
Hmm. I really want to hear what that treatment is, but first, I'm hoping you can define some things for us. People hear the terms seasonal affective disorder or SAD. They, hear, just some of the things we've already been talking about. So, can you define that for us? What is SAD? What does that mean?
It's describing a strong tendency to relapse into depression, or as you pointed out, into blue mood quite reliably as day length decreases in the fall, and the critical the specific aspect of that is as sunrise gets later and later in the fall and winter. This affects us physiologically, and our circadian rhythms begin to slip later because they are anchored to sunrise. That's the way we are built. That's the way the whole animal kingdom is built. So as we slip later and have trouble waking up in the morning and are dragging through the day and are developing a set of other body symptoms specifically focused on appetite, craving for carbohydrate-rich foods, beginning to gain weight, as well as feeling really down. It all comes in as a package.
Hmm.
And you're going to see that in milder form throughout the population. So we have tracked in population studies people who don't have any consciousness of dipping seasonally. But when you track them with logs and questionnaires, you see that their mood is falling and they are gaining some weight and they are having a little bit a feeling of excess sleepiness and trouble getting going during the day. This applies throughout the population, but at a sub-threshold level that doesn't bother you.
Hmm.
So, but we see traces of it all over the place. It's a quite normal cycle, but the magnitude of that cycle in about 5% of the population is quite remarkable and severe, and does require an intervention. Essentially, you're dropping out of functional life for
Hmm.
4 or 5 months of the year. Uh, uh, it's interesting to compare it with other types of depression when you don't know when you're going to crash and you don't know how long that episode is going to last. These are people who historically are strongly dependent on antidepressant meds.
Hmm.
Uh, there's a mystery aspect there because it is not so predictable. In a way, people are sad, even though they're feeling rotten when it hits, they have an advantage because they know quite reliably when it's going to come,
Hmm.
and they have the faith that it's going to let up at a certain time. And this certain time varies plus or minus a couple of months from person to person. But
Hmm.
any individual will be able to anticipate that, oh, by uh, this time next month, I'm going to feel like a human being again.
And what I hear you saying is that while the severe depression may be a much lower rate, it's pretty normal for people to feel sluggish and snacky and a little bit, well, sad, if you will, when it is the light is less, when it is darker, longer outside. For me, I think the thing I notice isn't that I feel sad or sluggish in the winter. It's when it starts to get light again, I notice I feel better. And I didn't notice I was feeling bad, right?
That, that's exactly my point. Uh, you you have to recognize it by looking at the contrast. And
Yeah.
in a case like yours, um, you're part of that majority of the population who just travels with it. This is a part of normal life in the northern part of the world and in the temperate zone.
Mm-hmm.
You grin and bear it. You're fully
Mm-hmm.
functional. You know it's going to resolve. And so that's the way we're built.
And I read that it's actually very common, like you don't have to live in Alaska or in Canada or even in Minnesota to have this be part of your life. That it happens even a little bit further south than that pretty reliably. Am I the only person who's surprised by that?
Well, uh, here's what the most recent research shows, and it's based on um, sampling throughout the continental US. Um, you find a little bit of it in the southern tier states. Say 1% of the population will complain. I get phone calls from southern Texas, from Florida. Um, um, it look for those few people who are affected, it looks just as bad. But you know what's happening to sunrise in Florida? It's also getting later when
Mm,
winter comes. Uh, Not as extreme, but it depends on an individual's sensitivity.
sure.
Then, as we climb up the latitudes gradually, um, from the southern states up until the uh, middle states of the U.S., we see an orderly increase in the number of people who are experiencing this problem. When we get up, and now I'll speak technically, when we get up to 38 degrees north latitude, that's the level approximately of Washington, D.C.
Okay.
It sort of gets as bad as it's going to be farther north. In other words, there's this incline in the lower half of the states up to the middle, and then it levels off, it ceilings out.
Mm,
So if you're living in Washington or New York or New Hampshire or Minnesota, the likelihood that you're going to feel this way is pretty much the same.
hmm.
The sun has risen, the delay in sunrise has gone far enough to trigger the full syndrome.
Hmm. So, Uh, but okay, or rather, but even if you're not somebody who's suffering from severe depression through this, and as you said earlier, requires intervention, there's certainly ways to mitigate any of these feelings, right? Like you don't have to live in contrast with your better, happier self for 4 months of the year. There are things you can do, correct?
There are things you can do, um, but let me point out one feature that is not widely recognized.
Okay.
It's not 100% sure that you are going to slump or crash year after year after year without exception.
Hmm.
It's more of a statistical thing. It's going to happen most years. And it's even possible, and perhaps this is dependent on life circumstances, uh,
Hmm.
It's even possible to skip a year now and then.
So I'm guessing that life circumstances, right? Other problems such as COVID, for example, isolation, other life circumstances like that are really weighing on you could all be part of a year that this is really a problem, while other years where you're having a better time of it, right? No COVID or whatever. It's not as much of a problem. And for everyone listening, I apologize for my dogs barking. I am sure there's something very terrifying right now, such as the UPS man bringing us a package. Anyway. So,
Yeah.
but I imagine
Um,
that, I mean, real life, but I imagine that those circumstances are things like that.
it's a good point. Um, and the COVID case, which is so current, is the isolation indoors
Mm,
um, um, has exacerbated uh, this problem currently. But there are many individual life circumstances like stresses at work
sure.
and illnesses of other kinds that can make it more likely that you're going to crash that year. So this actually, the American Psychiatric Association, which establishes standards for the diagnosis of various disorders,
Hmm.
um, will say that over your lifetime, seasonal episodes have to significantly outweigh non-seasonal episodes. Uh, so if simply because you skip a year and are lucky doesn't mean that it's not going to come back.
Mm.
Statistically, you have to expect that it will happen again. So it's really important on a year by year basis to look for signs that it is setting in. And
Mm.
we've got a way to do that now. This is a more recent insight. There's a certain point in this seasonal cycle where you know you have crashed. You're out of it. But before that happens, for a month ahead, you may notice that that's when you start having trouble waking up.
Mm.
That's when you've switched from your healthy summer diet and going for the Ben and Jerry's and the pizzas and whatever is your thing. When that happens, it's a signal that the depression is going to hit within 3 or 4 weeks.
Mm.
And
And
so
this
you
is
could,
true for people who are not going to be clinically depressed too? Like these are
that's,
signs that everyone can look for? Okay.
of course, population as a whole is gaining weight every winter. It's just not as much, but everyone can look for this. Having trouble getting out of bed and getting to work on time. All of these are predictive symptoms that can tell you something bad is going to happen within several weeks' time. Now, if you pick up on that, if you learn that fact, come fall, come September, October, you can look for that rather than just ignore it when it happens and begin light therapy prophylactically.
Mm.
If you can begin the light therapy before the mood plummets, you can obviate the entire episode for a season.
Mm.
However, most people are not even thinking about these things. They're coming on rather subtly in the fall. And it's by the time they're ready to do something about it, they have crashed or they're feeling as worse as they are going to feel for that season. So I would say a majority of the people are waiting for the mood to go low before they are motivated to do something about it. That's fine also, because within about, I'm really averaging here, but within about a week or so of a daily light therapy, when you wake up in the morning for about 30 minutes, within about a week or so, even if you've become very depressed, it's likely that the mood is going to lift and you'll be back in your August, September state, and then in your July and August state, and then in your June and July state.
Hey humans, just a quick break to ask for a huge favor. If you're loving this episode, could you take a second to give us 5 stars or a great rating and review in whatever podcast platform you use? Those ratings help other humans find the podcast too and spread that humans outside love around the world. I can't thank you enough for listening and sharing your support through a rating and review. Now, back to the episode. How does one do this light therapy? Is this something you can do at home? Does going outside in the daylight count as light therapy? Is there any way to do this outside?
This is a good point. Time spent outdoors throughout the day has a mild mood lifting effect, but it's not as potent and obvious as doing a structured light therapy regimen as soon as you wake up. And if you're in the far north and you're still on a 9 to 5 work schedule, you are waking up in the dark.
Right.
By sitting at the breakfast table for 30 minutes with a bright light box, which has been developed specifically for this application, you're tricking the brain into thinking it's in the alternate season. The brain is interpreting that breakfast time exercise in the dark as the start of the morning. And your circadian rhythms, which have slipped later, are readjusting to their springtime state. So this is actually the question, as you asked it, is a little bit wrong. It's not, can you do light therapy at home? But essentially, you must do it at home. Because its efficacy depends on doing it as soon as you wake up. And you're not going to want to wait until lunchtime to do this on the job.
Interesting. Okay, so where does a person, what is the cost of one of these lights? Where do you get one? Give us some practical insight on the light therapy.
Yeah, well, everyone who's visited Amazon knows that there's 150 different light boxes for sale,
right?
With claims that they cure SAD, and virtually none of these have been tested clinically, and they are built in a way to sell as cheaply as possible.
What a surprise!
That's turned it into a mass market for ineffective light boxes. So the research field has developed criteria for an effective light box, and the typical commodity that you see for $39.95 on Amazon is a tiny little device, practically a handheld device, that claims to deliver 10,000 lux of light, which is 10,000 lux is an early morning outdoor light signal, which has proved effective in clinical trials. But in order to get 10,000 lux of light from a gizmo like that, you have to hold it 1 or 2 inches from your eyes. Intolerable,
Yeah.
glaring, impossible. You must look away from that light. You cannot look toward it. So an effective light box has a larger screen, and it may be 1 foot by 1.5 feet in size. And it delivers 10,000 lux, but consider how we experience 10,000 lux outdoors. It's coming from sky cover. It's
Mm.
not coming from the ground. It's not coming straight on from eye level. So the effective light boxes have a set of legs that lift them off the table and tilt the box down toward your face in a
Okay.
simulation of sky cover. And that way, the eyes and the brain and the body can experience that intensity therapeutically and comfortably at the same time. So uh, the design of clinically effective light boxes greatly contrasts with 90% of the devices that you see marketed right now. I would uh, really encourage your listeners to take to examine the details of my argument here on the website of the Center for Environmental Therapeutics.
Mm.
It's a simple name, cet.org.
Mm-hmm.
And there we go through all aspects of detecting the syndrome and treating it and selecting appropriate apparatus for it. And
Yeah.
the light box I've described is the main therapeutic intervention, but research has uncovered other methods as well, which are proving therapeutic without meds. And
Mm.
we examine all of them on cet.org, and then people can make a choice.
Sure.
Now, if an individual is in fact plunging into a major depression, um, um, he or she should not actually grab a light box and begin self-treatment
Mm.
without monitoring of a clinician um,
Mm-hmm.
who can look for overreaction, who can or underreaction, and can help guide the course or metaphorically adjust the dose to give an optimum effect um, uh, without disturbance on the one hand, or at a level which isn't going to help on the other hand.
Mm.
The people who fall into this middle range that we discussed, who are experiencing the winter doldrums or the
Mm-hmm.
winter blues, there's enough information out there, expert information, where you can read up on it and try it yourself.
Mm.
And I recommend the Center for Environmental Therapeutics website as being the most comprehensive source.
Awesome. Can you give us an idea of the price point for a decent light box? Are we talking $100? Are we talking 150? Like, what are we
Um,
thinking?
we're talking one to yeah 1 to 200. Average it
Okay.
at 100. Average it at 150.
Cool. Well, we'll obviously push people to go check out your website, cet.org, right? But just as you are looking at that, guys, just keep in mind that's the kind of price point you're thinking about, because if you are anything like me, you are doing exactly what Dr. Turin just said, which is heading to the Amazon machine and looking up your options. And
Well,
I mean, you're right. I have been
but
on there.
price itself is not the criterion. It's the design.
Right.
And
Okay. Okay.
it's possible to find an expensive light box that won't do anything for you.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. I'm sure that's very true. Now, for those of us who also want to go outside, I would guess that the preferred time to head outside for natural light therapy, in addition to what we're talking about here, from a light box, would be when the um, sun is the highest point in the sky. Is that? Oh, I mean, that's just a wild guess on my part. Is that accurate?
You don't have to wait that long. I used a magic number of 10,000 lux as having proved fully
Hmm.
clinically effective in clinical trials. And 10,000 lux is what we experience as you, for example, walk on the beach
Mm.
half an hour after sunrise. But as you go toward noontime, depending on where you live, of course, um, the level of light can rise to 100,000 lux
Mm.
or even higher than that. Um, and uh, uh, you're going to get the full bang at a half an hour after sunrise. You don't have to wait until lunchtime to do this. But
Cool.
of course, it will help to do that rather than not.
Right.
The problem is it's not simply the intensity, it's where your circadian clock has shifted between summer and winter.
Hmm.
And you want to catch your inner clock as it is transitioning from its nighttime state to its daytime state. That is where, and that's going to happen before noontime for most
Okay.
people. Not for everybody. Some people are going to be sleeping so much with SAG that they're not waking up until their clock has slipped hours and hours. They're not waking up until noontime, and that's morning for them. So we have to understand what is the physiological morning for each person. And there's a quiz on the CET website that will tell you where your morning signal lies. And some people and advise you to do light therapy according to that
Hmm.
rhythmic signal, which can differ by 6 hours from one person to the next person. This isn't a trivial difference.
Hmm.
So you want to find out where your rhythm is cycling in order to determine the optimum time to get the signal. But even later than that during the day, it it's more helpful than not to be outdoors.
Hmm. I'm glad you brought up the quiz because I was 100% going to make my next question. But how do you know what your optimal time is?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm an early morning riser. I'm an early bird. But given the option, I do not get up at 4 a.m., which is my normal alarm ringing. Right, I wake up naturally sometime around 7, 6:30, or even 8 o'clock if I'm really tired. So, it just varies widely if I have a alarm clock yelling at me or not. And I'm sure our listeners are very similar than that, although I pray that most of them don't have to get up at 4 a.m. like I do.
Yeah, well, this a lot of research has been done on this, and the a gold standard method for measuring where a person's circadian clock lies is by taking timed samples of blood samples
Hmm.
and analyzing it for the level of the hormone melatonin in the bloodstream.
Hmm.
And, and there comes a certain time in the during the middle of the day, we don't make melatonin. It's a
Mm-hmm.
night, it's a nighttime hormone. And at a certain point in the evening, it begins to rise. But for some people, it's not going to rise until after midnight. Other people are, it's going to start to rise at 6:30 in the evening. And that's the acid test for the position of the circadian clock. What we did is administer a set of questions about your timing preferences during the day.
Mm-hmm.
When would you prefer to exercise? When would you prefer to have meals? When would
Mm.
you prefer to go to bed if there were and wake up if there were no job constraints?
Mm.
And by answering all these questions, we come up with a score, which it turns out correlates very tightly with when you're producing melatonin at night.
Mm.
So we don't have to give a blood test to find out the right time of day for you. We can ask a set of questions, and it will we can use that to infer your underlying circadian cycle and then scheduling the light accordingly.
Wonderful. And I will include a link for that in the podcast notes, guys, so you can hop on over there and take that quiz and figure out when you should be doing this stuff and how to really amp up your mood. And we focus here at Humans Outside on going outside, but I'll tell you what, when you're feeling sluggish, want to eat a lot of snacks and having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, it's a whole lot harder to go outside. It might be good for you and it might be something you enjoy, but everything's harder when you don't feel good. And
Amen.
so if that means using some light therapy inside to make going outside that much easier and be able to get out of that and what you want to be able to get out of it, then by all means get a light box and use that sucker every day. So I'm selfishly sort of looking forward to taking the quiz myself and getting me a light box, because I was feeling this hard last year, and it wasn't until mid-February that I realized, okay, you know what, like this is a lot harder than it has been. One of the ways we sort of self-medicate here is in Alaska, people will tell you that they have to get out of the state in the middle of the winter to be able to feel better. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And we regularly go out of state in January to go to Florida or something, just to spend a
Of
week
course.
being a little warm and in the sun, right? And last year we waited an extra month. We had been going in early January and we went in mid-February, and it was too late. We needed to go earlier. And I could feel the difference having not done that. So
Lesson learned.
lesson learned. Hawaii was great, but man, would it have been greater if I'd gone 6 weeks earlier. So
But
that's
you can do light therapy at home and recreate the Florida situation uh, with respect to your circadian cycle and your mood. There are other reasons for vacationing down there, of course,
yeah.
but you can
So
make your
yeah.
own. You can make your own sunrise signal.
That's
At
right.
yeah.
Somehow I think the light box therapy at my kitchen table in Alaska will not be all that I was hoping for out of a beach vacation, but we'll give it a try. Certainly less expensive.
You could be surprised because the switch in mood is quite dramatic.
Awesome. I volunteer to test this and I will report back.
Thank you.
So yeah. So okay, well, thank you so much for your time, sir. We sort of end our episodes pretty much the same way. Every time we've been focused really hard on the science here, and not so much the practicalities of going outside. So we won't ask you about your favorite outdoor gear unless you have something very specific you want to mention. But we do like to talk to our guests sort of on the way out of imagining just hearing about an outdoor time that really was meaningful to you, so that you can just walk us out taking as if we were there with you and describe that for us. So would you mind
Well,
describing an outdoor moment that was really meaningful to you?
A favorite feeling of mine, as I mentioned earlier in the program, is camping and sleeping in a tent, especially on the beach,
Hmm.
where the filtered dawn comes through the canvas and you hear the crashing waves. And to me, that's bliss. And I connect this to an experience I had with a patient at Columbia,
Hmm.
quite dramatic. He was a Vietnam War vet, and he had a lifetime history of very, very difficult sleep. And we were trying methods of light therapy to make him feel better. He said to me one time, I slept the best in my life in a bunk, in a tent in Vietnam with the war and the shooting going on all around me.
Hmm.
The environment was extremely threatening and disruptive, and I slept a full night and I woke up to that beautiful image of the sunrise coming through. And, and he, of course, was a light therapy responder as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
Uh, but despite the distractions of and the horror of the war going on around him, uh, when he was out of his usual dark bedroom and sleeping in a tent such that there was a natural sunrise bathing him in the morning, he felt like a new person.
Hmm.
Uh, and to me, that said it all.
Yeah. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today on Humans Outside. We really appreciate your time and your expertise, and I'm sure all of our listeners are trotting right over to the website to take the quiz and see what we need to do for ourselves to get through the darker time of the year. Thank you.
Thank you for a great interview.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the Humans Outside podcast. Before you go, I want to tell you really fast about something happening up here in Alaska if you happen to be in the area or want to come up for a winter adventure. Valdez Adventure Alliance is a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to improve the quality of life for residents and visitors of all ages and abilities through outdoor access, education, and two major events, the Valdez Ice Climbing Festival and the Valdez Fat Bike Bash. You can find out more about those at valdezadventure.com. Come up and visit me. I'd love that. Until next time, we'll see you out there.